to another YouTube Live here with myself and Coach Laura. Hi, Laura. How are you doing today?
Hello, Lisa. Good, good. How are you today?
Good. Not such a warm day over here at the moment, but it is what it is. We've talked about the weather more than enough, so let's dive into 7 things that are likely disrupting your hormones or might be disrupting your hormones. I'm excited for today's topic because yes, so many people, including myself, are struggling or have struggled with hormonal health in the past, and so I think these can be quite underestimated actually.
Yeah, likewise. And some of the things we're going to talk about, I see it a little bit more as a pyramid in what can we tackle first and not feel overwhelmed. So I'll let you kick it off from there.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, the first few that we're going to talk about are actually in regards to endocrine mimicking chemicals. And so, what do we actually mean by that? I think people might have heard of like, oh, something is an endocrine mimicking chemical and we should minimize it, etc. But what does that mean? So, essentially, an endocrine mimicking chemical is something that enters our body, perhaps through the skin or something that we eat or otherwise. And it has the ability to dock onto a receptor that's actually there to be docked onto by a hormone. So let's just say you have, like every hormones are transmitters that transmit messages from the brain to the body, essentially. And so these messengers travel throughout the body through the bloodstream, and they have a specific note, kind of like if you think of mail. So, you have an address, you have a delivery destination, and these hormones, they know where they should be going to. So let's just say a hormone is released and it's supposed to go to your ovaries. And then it gets there, but then its final destination, something's already there. So, for instance, like if you think of a parking lot, it's already taken. Their parking spot is already taken by something that looks a lot like them, that pretends to be them, that has a similar license plate, so to speak, and therefore it was able to park there, but it's not actually them. So then what happens with this actual hormone that's meant to go there, which perhaps was an estrogen or whatever, it continues floating in the bloodstream. So if you use the car analogy, it just keeps driving around in circles and whatever, and the liver has to do more work eliminating it, and oftentimes it doesn't succeed at doing so. So therefore we have more estrogen in the bloodstream, therefore a disbalance between other hormones and estrogen in this example is created. So, long story short, an endocrine mimicking chemical is something that enters our body that pretends to be a hormone and docks onto a hormone receptor, usually resulting into a hormonal imbalance if that happens in excess. If it's a little bit, then our liver can usually deal with it, can eliminate the excess of that certain hormone that we might have. But one of the first ones well, actually, the three ones that we want to talk about today, I also often refer to as the 3 Ps. So we have our plastic, we have our parabens, and we have our pesticides. And we're going to get into each one of them in a little bit more detail. So the first one, the plastic, is sort of is self-explanatory. Many things, particularly things like Tupperware, etc., they contain something that when we touch it, even just from touching it, but more so when we reheat food, for instance, they give off something and then that's absorbed by the food, and we eat that, and then that can mimic our hormones. So, great ways to eliminate some plastic in our world would be, for instance, to switch to glass containers or to never cook in plasticware, and so generally using ceramic bowls or whatever. But even if you're traveling, perhaps overthinking your travel. Drinking mug, your coffee mug, your protein shaker, and switching that for stainless steel or for other alternatives. I don't know what are your main tips for when you talk to clients, or even yourself, when you get people to transition out of using plastic.
Yeah, so I want to point out initially first is okay, so you're going to use plastic. This is where you're at right now. Please do not heat up the plastic. Don't put it in the microwave. Whatever you do, whatever, if you have food contents in your plastic, please, if you're going to, that's step number one. I know it's overwhelming because you can buy glass containers and then they have a plastic lid. It's like, how can we navigate these situations? So it's really knocking things out as easily and simply as possible. I do also understand that when you're traveling, you want more lightweight containers. So I, even for myself, it's like I still have some plastic lying around and we utilize that. It's more okay. So this is something that I can start with first.
Mm-hmm.
Water bottle is a great example. There are so many options for stainless steel water bottles. Let's start with that. Not reheat any sort of food with your plastics, and then start knocking things off slowly like that. That's kind of where I start.
Absolutely, you're completely right. People tend to get overwhelmed when you're like, "Oh, you should get rid of the plastic in your household." Of course, these things also cost money. They're expensive, and but when we buy new things, or even just when we think of our kids as well, most of their toys, many people don't think about it, but they're plastic. They put them in their mouth. So maybe if you gift someone else or some other kid a toy, pay attention that it's like made out of wood or something else that they don't put in that you don't have to be afraid that that contains something that could mimic hormones. And even of course for kids, we sometimes think it's not as dangerous or it doesn't affect them as much. They're more resilient, but we should start with everybody. And um, if you make changes in your household, make them for everyone, and don't just say like, "Oh, mommy's going to do this different, and everyone else is going to have that." And educate your kids around that as well, and switch out one thing at a time, replace something one thing at a time, make these small changes over time. And same goes for the next thing that we're going to talk about, and that's parabens. So that's often in cleaning products, in skincare products, anything like lotion, like yeah, if like the even the shampoo that we're using, anything that's commercially produced, or sometimes it might even say without parabens. But I still recommend getting some organic skincare or cleaning products nonetheless, just because in general we're on the safer side when it comes to making sure that there's actually nothing that is going to permeate our skin and get into our bloodstream that we don't want there to be. And again, you don't need to, from today to tomorrow, throw everything out. Just slowly make your changes there as well.
Yes, I agree, and I'm glad that you said that a lot of these products say paraben free. At least that is a step in the right direction, and then it's kind of taking a look at the label, and there's several things in there that you can't pronounce and you don't know what they are. And as you mentioned, not getting overwhelmed, it's look at those reliable brands and then start to shift towards those. Especially cleaning products, I find it's really easy. Let's just use vinegar. I know it doesn't smell very good, but
Mm.
it's a step in the right direction, and then kind of evolve from there. That's my recommendation
Oh,
usually.
that's actually such a great tip, and I used to really do a lot of things with vinegar as well when I was more like permanently settled somewhere. But for instance, mixing water, vinegar, and dishwash liquid,
Yeah.
you can make your own fabric softener, for instance, or you can make your own shower cleaner and all these things. And you can even use that while you're in the shower because there's nothing wrong with vinegar at all. So yeah, a great point of just getting a little bit inventive and using vinegar or even lemon as well as some way to enhance your cleaning.
Yeah, and another something else I like to add if you like that fresh smelling, you can use essential oils. That's a
Mm.
really good alternative to add to your homemade cleaning products too.
Really good point. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I guess the third point or the third P that we were going to talk about in regards to endocrine mimicking chemicals, that's the pesticides. So the things that our food is sprayed with most of the time. And one really important thing to point out is that we truly do not have to pay or purchase everything organically, not even close to half of what you're buying. And the great thing is you can simply look up what things are worth purchasing organically and what things are not. So for instance, if you head to a website called ewg.org, so Environmental Working Group, and they every year they put out a list of things called the Clean 15. So 15 things that are truly like even non-organically, you can absolutely eat them without any concern. And then another list, which is called the Dirty Dozen, and those are the 12 the foods that are most heavily laden with chemicals. So, for instance, strawberries or spinach or blueberries, which kind of makes sense also, just from if you think about how they're grown versus on the clean 15 list, you'll find things like bananas, obviously kind of covered with the skin, or avocado or corn, or so again covered by something else. So it sort of makes sense even just from what the plant looks like. Um, but yeah, people always say like, "Oh, I can't afford to eat everything or purchase everything organically," and I do think that some vegetables are better than no vegetables. So if you're on the boat of I'm either going to purchase the conventional ones or none at all, by all means, go ahead and do that. But we are talking about hormone optimization here. So for the people that want to go that little bit extra way, or that are having issues with their hormones, that could just be something to dock onto.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know strawberries are always at the top of the list. But so one of the things that I like to do and I recommend is soaking your like your fruit, anything that's fruit, berries, those sort of things, is you can soak them in some cold water and baking soda for 15 minutes,
Mhm.
rinse them off nicely, and at least that gets some of the grime out. That helps a little bit. There are other kind of products and gadgets out there that you can purchase, but I find that that seems to be the simplest way too.
That's a great tip. I like it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Yeah.
my pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess if we move on from the three P's to other things that are most likely messing with your hormones, the next one, which is the most common offender, is unfortunately alcohol. Um, we really do hate to be the boogeyman over and over again, but it is just something that's really a heavy burden on your liver. And as I mentioned before, hormonal health really in part comes down to a lot to how your liver is functioning, how well your liver is able to quote unquote detox the body on a daily basis. And so if we have such a heavy burden, your liver is always going to prioritize removing the toxin alcohol from your body first over prioritizing getting rid of excess hormones or these endocrine chemical mimicking chemicals, etc. So if you regularly consume alcohol, this can really be a big burden for your liver. So we would almost prefer you have 3 drinks one night per week than every other night having one drink. And it's exactly that word that so many people do. They're like, oh, it's just one drink after work most days. Unfortunately, that in particular is super, super stressful for the liver. I don't know how you go about that with your clients. I always find those conversations so hard to have because you don't want to be like, you shouldn't drink at all. But the truth is, when we're talking about health optimization, the less the better. There is no arguing that any kind of drink is beneficial, so to speak.
It is. It is a tough conversation. It's a big part of socializing, and I get it. What I like to start off with is how are you feeling the next day? Even if you
Mm,
have one drink, if you're so used to having that one drink, you don't think you feel any differently. However, if you just start to pay attention, do you feel a little bit more bloated? Do you feel a little bit puffy? Is that something that you want to continue to feel? What is, so you kind of have to dig in a little bit deeper. And then, as you mentioned, how can we work this in, especially right now in our season of summer? There are a lot more socializations going out here. Alcohol is everywhere. So what are
mhm.
your I like to say, what are your intentions before even going out to these situations? And then going in that decision in that direction. If you decide to have a drink, then you've already made that decision. And what can you do to kind of, if you can, counteract that, get enough sleep, which we'll talk about all those things, and how can you support your liver, because if you've
Yeah.
noticed, this is something that you've repeated how much burden our liver is under. So again, it is a tricky situation.
Absolutely. But yeah, unfortunately, I would absolutely recommend tackling that probably even before the 3 Ps, to be honest, if someone's having hormonal issues. But yes, so that was the next one on the list. And we have another sort of lifestyle one that I wanted to talk about, and that is lack of sleep or poor stress management. Because especially with sleep, during the sleep, again, our body's cleansing out things. This is when we're rejuvenating, when especially when we're detoxing and all this. If we have a lack of sleep, our body is struggling with everything else and is going to be more of a stressed out kind of mode. So that would definitely be something to work on also. And often we don't connect that with our hormonal health.
Yeah, that's a good point. So how can you kind of explain how impactful it is on our hormones specifically, and
Mm.
how can you even tell if your hormones are off?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. How can we tell hormones are off? And so, I mean, most women get a regular feedback by the way of cycles being irregular or lack thereof, etc. That can be a big sign that something is off with your hormones. It can be other symptoms like hair falling out or just being more irritable or just if things are feeling off. That's probably the best way to put it. For men, it's just generally like a lack of energy. Most of the time, it will be more testosterone going down. So, for instance, that can show off. And by the way, that in the morning they don't have morning wood anymore, which is a healthy thing. They should be having that. So, um, if that goes away, or if your libido is in the basement or absolutely non-existent, another really good sign. So really just paying attention to how you are, how irritable you are, how well rested you feel, what your energy levels are throughout the day. And then of course perhaps getting your bloods drawn, and we do want to get our bloods taken or checked at least once a year, ideally twice a year. Some people even recommend 4 times or once a quarter. But yeah, I mean, with twice a year, we can already do a lot. And I would absolutely, because oftentimes they don't include sex hormones automatically. I would most certainly make sure that you do include them if you have the possibility. But yeah, you mentioned like in regards to the point of sleep, how does that show up? So often we can also tell by the way that we're hungrier the next day. So that means our ghrelin, our hunger hormone, so to speak, is higher, and our leptin, our satiation hormone, is going to be lower, and mostly because cortisol is higher as well. It can even show up by the way of the scale going up or scale being higher, because when cortisol is up, or when we're stressed, when we haven't slept so well, when we haven't detoxed all this other stuff from the prior day, it might be up. So those could be some simple indications that hey, your hormones are off. And of course, if it's like off for 1 or 2 days, and then you catch up on your sleep and everything's fine again, that's a different story. But if we're talking about a continuous pattern that's not necessarily improving, I think that's where we need to become a little bit more or be on the lookout.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned men as well, because we both know that this affects men as well. It's not just women who have estrogen. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And also, paying attention to how things feel and how you can maybe even just make one small shift and see if your body responds positively. And then okay, so maybe my hormones are a little bit off because I'm decreasing these the parabens or the parasites, whatever it is. And it might take a little bit of time, but also just recognizing that, oh, this does actually, I do feel better when I've
Mm.
gone in this direction. So thank you. That's really helpful.
I like your point of it's going to take some time. That's really, we should have started off with that, because when it comes to shifting anything with hormones, it's going to be like 3 months in at the earliest, you're probably seeing something, unless it really was just a minor off thing. But give your body time, 3 months, up to a year, even 2 years when it comes to sort of getting things back into balance. And maybe you can give the listeners a little bit of clue or a cue on how to improve their sleep. Let's just say they're sleeping really light, or I don't know,
Yeah.
what would be the main things to look out for to improve your sleep quality?
One of the first places I start is let's try to get kind of like the circadian rhythm. We've all heard this. It's more within one window, going to bed at the same time. But what are you doing within that window? If you have it's just like kids. They like routine. So do adult bodies. You get familiar with this routine, and it's like, okay, so now it's time to wind down. Maybe that's an hour before you go to bed. You put some essential oils on. You turn the lights down in your house, even just to a nice glow, just nothing too stark. That's kind of an easy fix so that you have less stimulation. We can talk about screens. Everybody knows about screens, but it's more about the repetitive motion that your body it gets to be more familiar with. It's time to sleep and it's time to wind down. That's where I tend to start.
In the end, we're really no different than animals. Like, I mean, we can train our dogs for certain things. Our dogs, fortunately, are so like attuned to the natural circadian rhythm anyway, or day rhythm anyway. But they ring the bell and they saliva and get hungry, and in the end, you're brushing your teeth and your body knows, okay, soon we're gonna go to bed, type of thing. So you can absolutely get yourself more accustomed to like sinking into that more relaxed state. I think the hardest part on that routine front is definitely nowadays the putting away of the screens. A lot of people scrolling through their phones in bed or reading on. I mean, it might be a Kindle, it might even have night mode, but yeah, I think that's probably still okay. But if you like watch TV in bed or you're on your laptop in bed, certainly not great. I listened to some podcast the other day. It was actually brilliant. I'm gonna have to write that down. And but he was like, where we go wrong these days is that in the place where we're supposed to eat, so kitchen table, we are now being entertained. We're watching stuff. We're on our screens, etc. The place where we're supposed to be entertained, so in the lounge or in the living room, we're now eating, and then the place where we're supposed to be sleeping, we're also being entertained. So it's like our brain doesn't get anymore what we're supposed to be doing where. So I would actually also say a big part would be making your bedroom a place where you literally just sleep, maybe reading a book, maybe, some other cuddly activities, but otherwise not working from there, not consuming any content in there. And maybe even, and this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the hormone side of things, but maybe even also making the point that when you're in the kitchen or in your place of eating, that you literally just do your eating there, that you have designated spots for things. And because it like, especially if we're working from home, things get so muddled in our brain, and it's harder and harder to switch off. And one thing that we spoke about previously, where you mentioned that you have your moms, especially if they're working from home or if they're stay-home moms, you have them go for a walk once they're done with their daily task, and then when they come back, that's when they need to start winding down and accept that it's now evening time, because otherwise it all blurs into one. And then at 7:30 at night, you find yourself answering work emails. And at 9 o'clock, you find yourself shopping for this and that. So, like, get some designated spots for where you're productive, for where you're eating, for where you're relaxing, to help your brain ease into that parasympathetic state.
That's a really good point. And what I took is like transitions. And this
Mm-hmm.
could and this could be a 5 minute could be a 30-second transition depending on where you are. And if you're feeling really overwhelmed, it's starting with that 30-second transition. It's something you do going from mom mode to work mode, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's deep breathing, whatever it is, those transitions are tricky.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that that was that's a super important point also, like sleep and stress management altogether. But the other thing that was kind of connected with that and that we already also touched on is just overall inflammation. We might be overtraining, we might be eating crappy foods, all these kind of things that make the body inflamed from within. And naturally that puts your body into a state of like bit of freaking out or stress also. So high cortisol, therefore, the other hormones are also not necessarily going to be prioritized when it keeps comes to keeping them stable. Another stressor that we often obviously deal with is also from dieting too long or not eating enough for too long. And that's a big stressor for the body, and your body is kind of going into survival mode or thinking it needs to prioritize surviving over reproduction, over well-being, because obviously you surviving or just living is more important than quality of life. So yeah, those are really really big things that we see quite often if people, especially if people have been under eating for a long amount of time.
Yeah, and with that also are viruses.
Yeah, very
That
good point. Any kind of virus, yes, absolutely. That can impair that, and of course that shows up on the scale also, which people often underestimate.
Yeah, exactly. So if you know you're hit with something with a virus, that's when you really bump up those cruciferous vegetables in order to support
Mm,
your liver for one thing. But I mean, there are many other things we can talk about. But though I just wanted to point that out that viruses also cause inflammation, and certain inflammation is not. We need inflammation in our body. It's not everything. It's more like we've been discussing. It's the overload over time
yes.
so that we are able to kind of flush it all out.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and why don't we give people a few more things that they can do in order to get their stress or their inflammation down? So you mentioned cruciferous vegetables. I mean, I would say overall food quality, like if you are consuming more processed foods on a regular basis or highly like sugar or sugary stuff, processed vegetable or highly refined vegetable oils and so on a more regular basis, that would be the first place to look into, just generally moving more to a whole foods based diet. So 80-90% whole foods, things that have minimal ingredients, one or two ingredients, or are minimally processed. And then of course, if we're talking about fine tuning, cruciferous vegetables, dark leafy greens, berries, etc. Yeah, love those absolutely. Or things like salmon. If you don't consume fish or fatty fish, supplementing with omega-3 can absolutely help. Also, what are some other great anti-inflammatory foods that you love?
You've laid it out really well. I like to like let's grab let's reach for those bright fruits. The bright
Hmm.
food, like the peppers have high vitamin C. We have the berries, which also offer fiber and multitude of vitamins, and getting our protein in there as well. Like you said, egg yolks have that choline
Mm,
in there.
mm-hmm.
I one of the top recommended supplements I have for most of us is omega 3s. I think that it just really helps kind of mitigate some of the toxic overload that we have. It's not solely for that, but I do find that
Yes.
it's helpful. So that would be one of the main things that I recommend on that front.
Absolutely. Yeah, and talking about supplements, that was actually going to be my last point on this list of 7 things. We have the vitamin D. And vitamin D is something that most people are deficient in, even if we don't live somewhere where it's as cold as where Laura is. And but we just don't spend that much time outside anymore, especially not with our skin exposed. We cover up or we apply a sunscreen, etc. So we don't have that opportunity to absorb as much vitamin D as our body needs, and our vitamin D is crucial for hormone development or for hormone production. So very often, if someone struggles with just generally hormone production, even thyroid hormones in particular, um, cranking up that vitamin D. And of course, we can't give super generic or like blanket recommendations. It's always best to have your blood markers in front of you to know how much you should be supplementing with. But for most people, something like 5,000 IU per day is probably a good dosage. Maybe a little bit less in summer, maybe a little bit more in winter if you live somewhere where it's very dark and you don't go outside at all. But yeah, that would be a supplement I would absolutely look into if you're struggling with hormonal health.
Yes, I totally agree. And I'm in the same rhythm, lower during the summer, higher during the winter, and also including a D3 K2 in there for
Mm.
absorption has been is a staple as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, so I guess we did complete our list of 7 things already. So just as a recap, we had our parabens, we had our pesticides, and we had our plastic that we want to get rid of or limit as best as possible, as they're endocrine mimicking chemicals. We would definitely want to make sure we're getting a good amount of sleep, good quality sleep, making sure we're doing all the right things in regards to bedtime hygiene, etc. Also to help us limit that inflammation in our body, all throughout our body. Um, we also had alcohol that we want to limit because again, it is a toxin. It is something that's foreign in our body that our body doesn't need or want. And then lastly, we had the vitamin D, which we want to look into, because most people nowadays are unfortunately deficient. So hopefully that was helpful. If anybody has anything else to add or any questions in regards to those 3 that we mentioned, we'd love to hear about it. So leave us a comment. And yeah, that's everything from me and Coach Laura. Thank you guys so much for watching. And thank you, Laura, for joining me in today's discussion.
Oh, well, thank you, Lisa. It's good. Take care,
See you
everyone.
later.
See ya.
Bye.